Okay, great. I think we'll just kick off then. Welcome everyone to this month's Digital Fund monthly learning event. We host these events every month, and each month is on a different topic that we choose at the Digital Fund to guide our learning and insight for that month, which we do together with our cohort of 29 grant holders who use the month to reflect on a certain theme or topic and send in their reflections and insights and kind of learning for that month through a form. This month's theme is collaboration and ecosystems, which is a topic really close to my heart. And I know also there are a lot of people within the Digital Fund cohort and also our support partners, Shift, Cast, and Dot Project, who work together within the Catalyst network. It's a topic that's really hot at the moment, especially with COVID and the real kind of more obvious need to work together as a sector instead of actually compete for limited resources. So I'm really excited to dive into this. The title itself of the event is Radical Collaboration and Ecosystems. And so those are terms that we can dig into a little bit in the discussion. We've made references, if you've been here, some of you have been here at kind of almost all of the previous learning events. And so there have been references to like this need for almost like remodeling the sector and what we mean by the charity sector into one that works together as like a networked, coordinated effort. So I think that's kind of what I'm referring to when I talk about radical collaboration in ecosystems. Today, we're going to be hearing from grant holders from NCVO, Children's Society and Refugee Action, and hearing a bit about their kinds of experiences of cross-sector collaboration within the UK charity sector. But then I know we've also got Ben from Relate, Sarah from Relate, Jake from Lancashire Women Centre, Rachel from Family Lives. So we've got I'm probably going to miss some out. We've got Kerry from National Ugly Mugs and Jade from National Ugly Mugs as well. So I know there's lots of other grant holders here as well, and hoping for an opportunity later on to pull in some of you if you want to join the chat, or if there's a point where you feel you've got something to say, just put it in the chat and we can just pull you into the conversation. It'd be great to have you join us. Great. So just quickly, the kind of run sheet for today, we're starting a bit past 5:30. Then we're going to start the panel. I'll just start by handing over to Lucy and Megan, and hang on, I'm going to have a brain blank. Lucy, Megan and Renee, sorry, our three panelists, just to chat a little bit about their organization and like just introduce themselves just for a couple minutes. And then I've got a bunch of questions, and I'm hoping we always run out of time with these webinars, but I'm hoping to get a juicy discussion in. And then at around 4:15, we'll open for like a question and answer. And if you want to put your questions in the chat so that the panelists and me can be reading through those and we can kind of already get a sense of where the conversation's going, then we'll open it up for discussion and then wrap up at 5. So yeah, I think that's everything. Are there any questions, or have I missed anything out? No. Good. We've just had a couple more people join. Hi, Kirsty and Annie, both from Dot Project, who are our support partners for the Digital Fund contract. Good to see you. Great. So I'm going to open it up to our panelists. If one of you want to go first or feel like jumping in, just to kind of give a bit of opening thoughts, maybe like tell us a little bit about your organization and having filled out the type form for this month on this topic, like maybe just a couple opening thoughts on this topic of collaboration and ecosystems. I can also pick someone. I've got a thumbs up from Renee. You want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So my name's Renee Mann. I'm the National Business Development Manager at Refugee Action. So I'm here from my colleague Pascal Gayford, my other colleague and good practice team Laura Evans, who are really leading on this work. We work in the refugee and asylum field, and the work of our team in terms of the Digital Fund it's particularly in terms of ecosystems and collaboration, has really been how can we help to amplify the collective impact of all, the 900, small, isolated or frontline organisations who are supporting people in the field by being able to respond to some of the issues collectively that they're facing. And I think for us, it's the challenges of this work are around how do you prioritize, like which needs, how do we prioritize, that constant field analysis that you need to be able to prioritize with organizations, and making sure that you're there for all and inclusive. So keeping that kind of open approach, which digital has enabled us, but for everyone to participate, they need to have resources to be able to do that. So how do you meet in kind of an equitable way? I think there's some of the kind of key tensions for us. But I'll stop now and hand over to Lucy or Megan.
Hi, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a Digital Impact Lead here at the Children's Society. And thanks to Phoebe for inviting me along today and joining these other excellent panellists. So just a brief introduction to the Children's Society. We're a national children's charity working with some of the most vulnerable teenagers in society today. We run lots of local services and also have some national programmes of work. And our services range from supporting children going through going missing from home, those at risk of sexual exploitation. We provide mental health drop-in centres, and we run groups for young refugees and migrants as well. So we deal with a lot of complex issues that young people are facing and experiencing today. So this month's theme of collaboration has been a really interesting one for us to respond to. We're quite a large organisation, so we that comes with a sense of responsibility and recognising also there are lots of other children's charities, both large and small, working in a similar space to us, and we really want to get better at collaboration. And I have to confess we don't have all the answers, so I hope we can talk through some of our examples today. But just to acknowledge really that on reflection it's quite hard to collaborate, but just thinking about it being better for the sector as a whole to be pushing in the same direction and having that joint impacts for young people and our work with them, but also at the same time bringing efficiencies as well. Some of the things we've been thinking about. And passing over to Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the Director of Strategy and Transformation at NCVO. So we're the largest network for charities and other voluntary organisations, and also for volunteering in England. And we support organisations to make a bigger difference, and we champion and kind of mobilise our kind of collective voice to influence decision makers, etc. And we were 100 years old last year. And this is a really interesting topic for us because we are 9 months into developing NCVO's next strategy. So 100 years old, and with the new chief exec last year, we launched a big consultation with our members and other stakeholders to understand kind of how we need to change, what we need to focus on, and particularly how we need to work. And some of the things that came through most strongly from our members were really about having a more relational approach. So thinking about how we collaborate with our members, work alongside them, amplify their voices. Something that I think has come up really strongly as a really interesting topic across the organisation at the moment is that question of expertise and who are the experts and what kind of expertise do different people have, and how can everyone kind of play their best role together. And I guess the other thing in terms of thinking about kind of ecosystems and collaboration, thinking all the way back to kind of the process of applying for the Digital Fund grant, is we think about it on that level in terms of NCVO's role within the sector and with our members, but also in this layer of, you know, what we call infrastructure, which NCVO sits in, which is all those organisations that support other organisations. And that's an area, I think, which we might talk about a little bit more, where we're really trying to think very intentionally about how, what role we play within that, particularly given kind of some of the power that we hold as quite a large organisation compared to some others in that kind of space. So yeah, really pleased and looking forward to all the discussion today.
Awesome. I forgot to say, we try and run these sessions as kind of relaxed and kind of friendly as possible, and it's really about group sense making. So yeah, I'll just kick off with a question around, we know collaboration is hard. Like, I think that is probably like universally accepted, that we you know, we've got this lovely idea of collaborating and how it could all be really lovely and easy, and you know, we can just like all get on the same page and it'll work out. But there are a lot of difficulties in actually developing like good collaborations, good relationships, and like, you know, that comes down to things like communication, shared expectations, spending time together. And obviously within COVID, a lot of those ways of building solid relationships and spending time together in the kind of human aspect have gone away. So we'd love to just open the floor with like, what do you think are the most important qualities of a good collaboration, and what are the things, like the ingredients that add to that happening? Like, I know it's a really basic question, but to start off, like, what are the ingredients for you of a good collaboration? Yeah, go for it, Megan. And you can, like, if we want to unmute and kind of have it as a discussion, the four of us to start with, then we can also do it like that.
Okay, yeah, I'll kick off. I mean, I've been talking to my one of my colleagues, Sarah Viber, particularly around the work we've been doing through this crisis, kind of collaborating with a very large group of infrastructure organisations, particularly to lobby government through the campaign that was originally called Everyday Counts and then turned into kind of Never More Needed, to get that money. And I think, Phoebe, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about relationships, because although these are organisations collaborating, it's really all dependent on the relationships between people. We've been reflecting on how important it is to have invested time in building those relationships so that you can kind of collaborate really well, because it's only kind of through those, that kind of establishing of those individual relationships that you can kind of understand different people's kind of preferences and working and learning styles and kind of strengths and weaknesses, and on that then you can kind of be really honest with each other, which you really need to do, particularly if you're working at pace in a collaboration, and particularly a very large one. And so I think we've been reflecting on how this crisis has played out, and we had to mobilize very quickly. We had to work together very quickly together, entirely remotely, which we know is kind of not the easiest thing to do. And so we feel that we've really been kind of trading on the social capital that we had built up historically. So all of those kind of really good, strong relationships are what has made this work. But also that maybe as we've been working so hard and under such pressure, that maybe those stocks are depleting now, and it's going to become really important to kind of step back and reinvest in those relationships, and not just be doing what's the next thing, what's the next thing coming out of government, how can we agree quickly on what we need to do. So yeah, it's all about those relationships, and I've also been reflecting on how some people, that's the thing that really energizes them, is just building those relationships, what they love most about work. And then some people it's not such a natural mode, and I think we have to recognize that as well in our organizations.
Thanks, Megan. That's really interesting, and definitely true that some people are really just like have a bias towards doing that work anyway, and for others it's like kind of almost like a distraction, and there's that tension of different sorts of people in that. Lucy, what about what's your
definitely agree about relationships, and it's quite a big effort to keep those relationships going sometimes, and and building up a relationship over sometimes a long period of time until an actual kind of, you know, a collaboration comes together that you can really join up on. I was just thinking about one of our examples of working with the police over quite a long period of time in a local setting, and then building up those relationships to then be introduced, I suppose, to kind of national leads for exploitation, for example, and then that leading to a further conversation of where we can collaborate in terms of the support that young people get when they go through that kind of police and justice system. And that's like really built up for us over a long period of time. But some of the kind of other things is just, I think, that makes it a really good experience is just having that really good solid joint goal or commitment to making something happen, and everyone getting really kind of getting behind that really positively and in a consistent way, and making sure that the right people are in that group and having that conversation. And also just another thing that kind of makes it and enables some of those honest conversations as well that you were talking about, Megan. I was just thinking about sometimes you kind of need the right legal framework around it, not wanting to get kind of technical, but sometimes just to give people that space to be honest and generate ideas together, and understanding kind of where these might go. And another thing we were talking about within our group actually was just having a bit of fun with the collaboration as well, just bringing in a bit of a human aspect. A lot of our work is very serious and quite deeply disturbing kind of scenarios that young people are going through. So, you know, keeping a bit lighthearted sometimes really helps keeping that conversation going and the momentum as well. And so people have a good experience along the way.
Nice.
I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I think that all of that's true. I think, you know, particularly collaboration in the context of COVID, I think having those solid relationships and having worked in this way, collaborated in this way, you know, in terms of, you know, co-designing solutions had really set us up in good stead to be able to move really quickly with trusted partners to be able to come up with some solutions to the issues that people were facing during COVID. But I think also something that I think maybe Megan had mentioned, that I think there is kind of a fatigue setting in now, particularly for those people at the centre of leading the collaboration. You know, there's such huge responsibility on people's shoulders to make sure the collaboration is effective and delivering the impact that everyone wants to achieve around that shared vision. And I think in this context, more than ever, I think that there's a point where you need to stop and just give people some space to reflect and reprioritise, because the need is so great. The need to collaborate is even greater, that it can feel quite heavy for the people at the centre of it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an ongoing theme, especially since we started these monthly sessions in March. So it feels almost like a kind of COVID response learning space of like what is needed and what's happening, and keeping a kind of rhythm of reflection. Yeah, and I think it's also true that to be able, relationship building it's one of those things that you can't really like have KPIs with, or like, you know, just kind of have a strategy and deliver it and then like close that. It's an ongoing complex thing. So I guess one ingredient I'm hearing as a consistent between all of your answers is just having like the space and time. And it's difficult to think about how and when that's going to happen, when it just feels like the crises are ongoing, and the work that all of you are doing is so urgent and important. But yeah, I'm very curious about how, I guess from the perspective of like support organizations or funders, how can that also just be a priority? It's like how to create more spaciousness or rest, or yeah, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm not sure I have any thoughts on that last bit, but I was just really interested in what you were saying, Phoebe, about how, you know, you can't just have a KPI or a strategy or just a, you know, really kind of clear kind of work plan necessarily for this. But it's something I'm thinking about a lot at the moment, because like I said, we're developing this new strategy, and we're now kind of moving towards the end of that, of kind of designing a new organisation. And part of that is we have four new values. And I know this is recorded, but I'm sure it doesn't reach that many people, so I'm just going to say them even though they're not public. But 4 new values, which are around being ambitious and open, collaborative and inclusive. And so we're really thinking quite a lot about what does that actually look like, what kind of behaviours do you see, and all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure other organisations kind of have stuff really interested in learning from others there. But also, you know, and just thinking, because we want to, in some kind of areas, we want to do things quite differently. We can kind of have a feeling, kind of vague sense of what that is, but we actually need to think about how that plays through into kind of how we organise ourselves and how we design roles, and trying to think about what are the levers that we do have to kind of shift us into new ways of working more collaboratively. So I'm just kind of fascinated in what is available to us, even though it's kind of not as straightforward as some other things.
Megan, I'm actually going to, unless Renee, you've got something to add to that.
Yeah, there's a just on that, I think that values is always the go-to in terms of what's driving collaboration. So you know, what sort of defines relationships. And there's a side piece of work that we're doing with a different sort of funder collaboration that very much links in with our good practice work for the Respond and Adapt program. And through that, we're commissioning some work with an organisation called Act Build Change, which is looking at care and wellbeing sessions for practitioners. And it's really helping practitioners to think about the values that are underpinning their work and what's driving them in their practice. And I think that that sort of mindful, reflective way of practicing is really fundamental, and I'm not sure that we do that enough in this field. We do a lot of doing, and we're very clear around strategy and what we want to change, but in, you know, the decades that I've worked in the space, I don't feel like there's enough. It's not built into the structures or necessarily the way that we're doing. And I felt the approach that Act Build Change was sharing, and, you know, the space that they were trying to create for practitioners sounds really valuable. So really happy to share that once they start in September, if others are interested.
Nice, yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to pick up on that after this, and definitely sharing amongst the grant holders, and maybe in a future learning session would be good to pick up on that. I've got all three of your answers from the type form for this month, and like obviously I've been reading through all of the different reflections, which are just so eclectic, and it's really interesting to see the patterns across the cohort. I wanted to pick up on a couple of things. So Megan, I'll just start with you, but not to pick on you, but I read about your answer around the coronavirus asylum handbook as an example of like a collaboration that you undertook that you felt was really successful and that it worked well. And it was just really interesting to hear about that. So, you know, it being a handbook of a collection of responses to COVID-19 challenges from 40 different organizations. And you wrote about how you were able to move quickly and adapt to emerging needs, and using Google Docs, which allowed like open editing and different people to kind of jump in. Could you say a bit about that process and like how, you know, maybe like the kind of tools you used like were helpful, and how did that work? Why was it such a successful experiment and project?
Phoebe, I think that was me. That was Refugee Action rather than NCVO. So I'm really happy to jump in.
I've got a different example for NCVO. Sorry about that. Yes.
No, that's fine. So yeah, the coronavirus handbook came out of, you know, everybody's sort of quick, what can we do? You know, what does the field need, and how can we support them during the coronavirus? So we sort of basically looked at our team and thought, how can we restructure and focus specifically on the adaptation crises for the field now, and how can we best support them? So we reorganised and restructured the team, and Laura Evans, who would normally be focused on our early action programme, and another colleague who works in our frontline programme, Julie, then created this, you know, coronavirus team. They did these 40 interviews with organisations that we already work with quite closely in the field, really try to understand, what does this mean for you? You know, what does coronavirus mean in practice terms for the people that you're supporting? What are they struggling with in terms of access? What are you needing to do differently? What are the kinds of practice issues that you're struggling with? And from that, they drew out sort of key themes. those themes then were and learning were just we started to then quickly publish in the coronavirus handbook, and we put that, like as you say, onto a Google Doc, which was then open access. Anybody could contribute to it. It's although we curate it, so we're constantly adapting it, we're taking the comments, making sure that it's all consistent. Anybody can contribute it, new learning and what have you. And then the learning from that analysis, we drew out 3 digital sprints, or four themes, sorry, that we're going to develop 4 digital sprints on over the next 4 months, between now and sort of September time, which are the sort of key practice issues that across the field we're hearing around consistent issues. So destitution payments, safe reopening of services, working with people with lived experience, and a single point of contact or sort of regional coordination of responses. And we've already done 2 of those sprints already, and then we publish that now onto our new good practice site. In terms of what enabled us to be able to do that, you know, it goes back to the earlier question around strong relationships, like relationships of trust, but also a shared strategy around what needs to happen for people to be able to live with dignity, but also to access justice if they're going through the asylum system. And quite deep relationships with many of those organisations, either they're existing partners with us on other forms of work, or we've been working with them at a regional level to understand what's going on for them. And I think that for a number of organisations, also having an initial understanding of what we mean and what does co-design actually mean, so trusting that process and being willing to share really openly and frankly their challenges, and knowing that that is something that's going to be supportive. It's not a judgmental space. It's about then thinking about how do we then work together to develop solutions. And I think just not to underestimate the support from Side Labs, who have been our digital design partners throughout this entire process. The team wouldn't have been able to then quickly convert and present such a kind of coherent and accessible response without the support of, and again, that relationship pre-existed, you know, that's at least 18 months of having worked with Noam while he was working through his work with us at CAST. So again, you know, collaboration absolutely central to all of this work. I can say more, but I'll stop there.
I think that's fantastic, and like that theme of having built those relationships before the sudden need and the sudden crisis, and yeah, that sometimes, you know, it can seem I don't know if every charity would see it as a good use of funding to just like build relationships when it's not clear where that's going or what the point is, but actually having that like latent trust and potential that's already built up seems to be like across the grant holder cohort, just like one of the most important ingredients. And then also you mentioned Side Labs and like these support organizations that can have more of a kind of bird's eye view or like connecting role, and obviously the work of Catalyst is so like central to this as well, and hopefully we'll bring them in the next learning session, just because that perspective of bringing together grant holders in clusters and getting funding for clusters instead of single organizations, and this kind of cross-sector support is really, yeah, it's really, really interesting. I know we've got Kirsty, and I can see Debbie, you're here from Catalyst, and Annie as well. I know Dot Project is doing a lot of work there. So yeah, it would be really good to go into that a bit more. I did want to make some time now for Megan to actually talk about what I was hoping to bring up, which is the Everyday Counts project, which then moved on to be called Nevermore Needed, like hashtag Nevermore Needed. And you talked about kind of how that worked really well because you got the sector behind a common cause. And yeah, again, it would be great just to hear it kind of bring that story to life a bit and hear a bit about what was working really well in that collaboration, and what were your learnings? Like, what did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, sure, I'll give it a go. I mean, I almost strung on my colleague to come and do this instead of me, because this is something I wasn't kind of directly kind of involved in, but she helped a lot with filling in the form this month. So so that campaign, I think, was definitely kind of the most kind of concerted, kind of collaborative campaign that I've certainly seen in my kind of long time in the sector. And kind of what made it so powerful, I think, was that by bringing together all those organisations, we brought together all of that kind of comms expertise and policy and research and campaigning and influencing kind of expertise, and kind of taken all together, we were able to kind of get that cut through at that incredibly kind of busy time of kind of crisis when everybody was lobbying the government, and although it felt to us like it took ages and ages, and it was yet another weekend when nobody was everyone was working through, yet another weekend we kept talking about, if the government doesn't give us something by this Friday, we have to stand everyone down because everyone's going to fall over, and it'd be like, oh no, one more push. So even though it felt like it took ages, I'm convinced that it was an incredible kind of success to get it over the line. I think other things that were so powerful about that were that different organisations kind of have different strengths and relationships. So particularly NCVO is traditionally seen as taking quite an insider approach. So we have quite strong relationships kind of inside government. Other organisations have much more expertise in kind of the kind of campaigning approach. So being able to balance those, and then also being able to bring in all of our allies across business and everywhere. So some charities, some organisations have kind of really influential people had access to, who I know were making noise behind the scenes, not in public, but who NCVO couldn't possibly have accessed. So that was really good. I mean, very kind of practically, I think through the campaign, I think there were daily calls of the chief execs from all of the kind of different organisations, and then second calls of kind of comms or policy kind of leads as well. So there was a lot of talking, a lot of WhatsApp, a lot of collaborative kind of editing of documents, research, of kind of press releases and all of that stuff. So like I said at the beginning, trading off a huge amount of kind of social capital that had pre-existed, and then just having to hit the ground running with some kind of new relationships and just kind of pull together at pace. Absolutely exhausting, but hugely successful. And I think although as we said, it's it wasn't enough, I think it's accepted, and we had feedback that without that one concerted effort, we would never have got so much from government. If we'd all kind of gone in asking on our own, we wouldn't have been so successful.
And that's a really good example, I guess, of like, even though collaboration is hard and exhausting, like that sounds like a massive win. And like being able to come together and have a really strong message and mobilize resources sounds kind of worth it. Nice. Cool. There are more questions I'd love to ask, but I also want to give a chance to Lucy. And Lucy, with your Typeform, I was like completely, just for everyone else, like there were just so many examples of Children's Society, of like a long laundry list of different kinds of collaborations. And it sounds like you guys are at least trying many different partnerships and collaborations. And in particular, you spoke about a kind of collaboration with Barnardo's Action for Children and other charities, which is kind of entirely new for the sector. Could you say a bit about that? Like, how are you managing to do that kind of cross-sector collaboration, and what's been hard and what's been worthwhile?
Yeah, sure. So just to say, there were lots of really good examples that I put in our Typeform. I'm not directly involved with absolutely every single one of them, so forgive me if I haven't got all of the details. But See Here Respond is a programme of work that we are doing. Bernardo's the lead charity on it, but we are working in collaboration with them and Action for Children and other children's charities as well, which is quite rare actually. And I think it came about in very early stages of COVID, when all the chief execs of those charities were actually coming together and having a conversation of what the impact on young people is during this time. And we did a lot of research with different partner agencies and organisations, local authorities, to find out kind of what was happening on the ground with young people. We're really concerned about the lack of access to schools and the usual places where young people kind of get referred into a lot of our services. and that obviously has just dropped off during COVID. And so it felt really urgent to try and do some research to try and find out what was going on. And I think that was what led to this programme of work being funded through the government as well. That is now, it's been created to kind of help children, young people in England from pre-birth up to age 18, and with those with special educational needs up to the age of 25, who are kind of really experiencing increased harm and adversity during kind of lockdown, and trying to provide support to those that are being really difficult to reach. So as you can imagine, across all those different children's organisations, we all have kind of our own strengths and weaknesses, I suppose. So I think, you know, identifying what those and what part of the programme we could all kind of deliver and help impact young people was really important. So our services, as I mentioned earlier, they are predominantly for kind of teenagers. So really we kind of fit the bill in terms of our services that we already have in place can, you know, really pick up some of the work to deliver for the most vulnerable kind of teenagers within that cohort. So and then obviously providing some digital support, face-to-face interventions when they're available, and then thinking about how we kind of reintegrate those young people into education, which is probably the next kind of a pain point that we're going to come up against in terms of helping support people get back into education after being away for so long. So yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, as I said, I haven't been directly involved with some of that work, but it's just starting now. So we're working out how we're going to be delivering those specific aspects that have kind of been assigned, that we'll be picking up.
Really interesting. And I also saw you wrote about a collaboration with the police that is a really important one for you at Children's Society. And I think Ewan is here as well, and we've spoken with Ewan about, I think we did, Ewan, correct me if I'm wrong, but about kind of collaborating with like local authorities. And I'm just curious about what do you think there's anything different, Lucy, in collaborating with the police versus like other charities, and how has that experience been, if you are involved in that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, what our ambition is really, and the police are joining us with that, is just to change the way that, you know, they interact and support and communicate with young people when they come into custody, for example, or thinking about the ecosystem around that young person and how it could affect how they interact with the police, which is very different to kind of working with other charitable organisations, I suppose, who you know, having that direct impact on young people, but the police see young people in a very different light sometimes. So responding, yeah, it's a very different type of collaboration, I suppose.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's great that we've just got a kind of overview of some of your experiences. What do you think are like tangible ingredients or like ways that funders, like from the point of view of a funder, what do you think are potentially meaningful ways that funders could better support cross-sector collaboration, or like either directly or indirectly? Yeah, have you got any thoughts or views on that from your points of view, having been quite clearly deep in these kind of cross-sector partnerships and collaborations, especially since COVID?
I was just going to reflect really that you know, traditionally the funding system is really not just generally set up for collaboration, from our experience, and the digital fund in particular has been brilliant to enable more collaboration. But I think traditionally it almost sets up organisations to be more competitive and to compete for funding from different organisations. So I think that ecosystem in itself is kind of set against us, and I'd really like to see more kind of collaborative funding and understanding of how we can, I suppose, receive greater, you know, provide greater impact for young people if we had a more collaborative approach to funding.
Yeah, definitely.
I totally agree with that, Lucy. I'd say that we need to resource organisations to be able to collaborate. So I think that because of the funding environment, but and the competition that creates, but also just the pressure of, particularly for us anyway, with frontline organisations where, you know, there might be maybe one part-time funded person and a team of volunteers. Their total focus is on keeping that operation going. Collaboration is something that they do to enable that operation, but to be able to then step back, be able to reflect on how they're operating and how they might be able to work differently with their ecosystem, their local system, and others, requires additional resource at a number of levels. So you need the sort of strategic buy-in from their board. Their board needs to understand and support them to do that. From, you know, the manager or the practitioners, from volunteers. It's a whole of organisation kind of commitment, and it does need resourcing for it to be equitable, particularly when you're then also looking at the power dynamics between larger organisations and smaller organisations, so that we can truly create collective impact at, you know, both the regional level, which is at a local level where the work happens, but also at a national level as well, so we can have that stronger voice. So I think it's about resourcing, but really thinking about it with organisations and finding out how best to resource them, but also to give them a shared language about what this collaboration. Like, collaboration is quite a big term, and it can be, you know, an umbrella for lots of different things. But I think if we're talking about changing the way that we work with each other, that requires a different way of resourcing organisations and how they are connected together to achieve a shared objective.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have two quite different thoughts on this, and I think neither of which are kind of quite clear in my mind, so excuse me if I'm not making any sense. I mean, I suppose kind of in one quite simple way, what's great about the digital fund is that it's a fund that expects you to learn and change your plans as you go. And if you are kind of developing something in partnership, you know, then you need time to establish those relationships and to understand how everyone can play their best role and kind of to adapt. So I guess, you know, there's something in how the digital fund works that also supports collaboration. And if I'm thinking back to another project when we did last year, which had a ridiculous 6-month time frame, and had to be a partnership approach, and where the effort, you know, in the bidding phase to somehow pin down a plan with people we'd never worked with before, and then just the amount of effort that went into then having to justify every change to that plan, it was just ridiculous, really was, and just really unpleasant. So that's kind of one thought. I suppose another thought I was having, just really interesting what Renee was saying. I've been at NCVO forever, and I remember previous times when there was lots of money around and lots of grant funding for kind of capacity building, and there were all these kind of hubs and support services set up, and they all tended to be collaborations. And so collaboration was funded through those. And I definitely agree that kind of collaboration takes resource and needs funding. But I think what I think didn't work kind of back then is that was activity being funded. But when that money went away, that way of working went away, because it was seen as kind of a thing you did because it was funded, not because that's how you worked as an organisation. So while I definitely agree that collaboration needs resourcing, it's also about how we influence kind of mindset and culture and leadership in the sector. That is how we do things. And yes, please support us financially to do it, but we're not only doing it because it's funded and we're kind of, you know, ticking some boxes. So yeah, those kind of some thoughts.
That is really, I think that's a really interesting point. It's like, we definitely need money to like be able to justify the space and time. And yeah, it's really nice to hear that the digital fund has, you know, it feels like it's giving that space in terms of like, we've actually written it into the contracts, like coming to these events and encouraging kind of cross grant holder collaborations with the support partners, and then the Slack channel as well. Like these little things, I guess, that do just also indicate a different culture. But it takes resource, like on our side, on the side of the lottery, it's like funders need to also kind of give that sort of skill and resource like time and importance. And I think something that hasn't really been touched upon here, but I guess from my background is kind of distributed governance and like team, like good team culture and that sort of thing. And there is a lot of actual kind of skill in like training that is possible to help train these kind of skills of collaboration, whereas usually it seems like it's something that we assume everybody just has, like everyone knows how to do good collaboration, and it's just a lack of time or kind of resource. But actually it does take just the same way as you'd hire in like tech teams. It's like how can we also kind of give those kind of roles more visibility of like collaboration or like relationship building or like team culture, that sort of thing. And I think organizations, I know we've got Kirsty and Annie here from Dot Project who do a lot of this kind of coaching and leadership and team culture. I mean, if either of you wanted to chip in, Kirsty or Annie, just about how you through your work with the Digital Fund grant holders, but maybe others as well, like how do you help encourage that kind of culture of safety and trust and collaboration? Sorry to put you on the spot, Kirsty and Annie, if you want to.
I'm happy to sort of answer it, possibly with a question. Actually, I'll just put a question in the chat, because it is, you know, that idea of working collaboratively, truly collaboratively, does take time, but it's not inherent. It's not something that everybody does or every organization does. So for us, in terms of what we've seen, it's very much about enabling that culture. And for some people, it's easier to enable than others. So we do a lot of work around enabling and aligning around that way of working. And it's quite a big mind shift for some people. Some people have been working that way for a long time. And for others, people find it really hard to move to that way of doing things. So one of the questions I was really interested in from the panel, but from anyone else who's listening today, is in your experience, particularly over the last few months, how much have your ways of working as an organization had to change to enable that collaboration to happen?
Great question. Thanks, Kirsty.
I'll try on that one. I think this is what I was hinting at the beginning. Actually, I think it can require quite a massive shift in how you do things, and I think it is sometimes about what you value. Like kind of thinking about an example from the past. We used to have a website which we inherited, which had a wiki built in. It's our kind of know-how website. Kind of had a whole section called how-tos, and it was a service that's transferred to us because it was grant funded, and the grant funding ended, and we thought we could probably sustain it. But it took kind of a role to reach out to the community to write things. And so we went to Nominate Trust and asked for funding, and got funding kind of for a proof of concept about whether or not the voluntary sector wanted to maintain its own wiki of kind of best practice, and did a lot of really good kind of practice research, and found kind of generally speaking, no, not the kind of thing that NCVO offered, because we're too generic, the kind of advice is kind of too it's not specific to kind of the areas that organizations are working. It's kind of like, good governance or good influencing or HR or whatever. And I think what came out of that was, there was one thing which was case studies, which people would be quite willing to give. So, but anyway, we ended up in a place where it was at a time when we had no grant funding, more efficient to write the content as experts than to resource people to go out and find the expertise. And I guess that's something that now, like I live through that, and I hold all of that insight from that. And there's certain things there that I think probably are still true, and some things that have changed. But yet we still want to work in a very different way. And so that means you have to value different things. It means you have to value less kind of getting more content of a certain quality out the door for this much resource, and value more the things you get by working collaboratively. So I think it really is a big shift, and it's not always, and your question as well, Kirsty, kind of talks about sustainability, and I think it's often quite in conflict with how we think about financial sustainability, because there you tend to be thinking more about efficiency and bang for your buck, which is often, I feel, well, not often, sometimes in kind of conflict with the kind of more collaborative mindset.
Lucy or Renee, do you have anything to respond to Kirsty as well?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting what Megan was saying about what you value. It's, yeah, really made me think actually. And I was just kind of thinking back to different people's roles, and I think for us, we're trying lots of different things in terms of collaboration at the moment externally. But I think like building in like really good collaboration internally is really important as well. Through COVID, we've had like this working group, which is our kind of CYP, Children and Young People's Ways of Working group, and getting into the rhythms of working collaboratively across lots of different areas of the organisation, which we haven't done in this specific space before in terms of bringing face-to-face service for young people online. And we all got behind this like really important goal and came together and got into different patterns of working and accountability and, you know, sign-offs and things like that started really early in lockdown. And we've recently done a bit of a retro of how the group is working and how we want to take it forward. And I think just demonstrating that internally to teams internally, the benefits of working in that really super collaborative way will really enable kind of them to, well, it sounds a bit patronising, but just, you know, just making it tangible and showing people the benefits of working collaboratively, even if it's just internally, then that can get people thinking in terms of what can be achievable externally as well with other partner organisations, and that's what we're kind of trying to do at the moment.
Great. I'm just having a look in the chat. Cool. Yeah, Ben, your point around kind of different sizes of organizations and kind of reach and scope, and then I quite like, Lucy, what you brought in here of like, I was just thinking, if an organization has got a culture of collaboration internally, if you've got a really kind of open culture where like mistakes are easy to kind of admit to and learn from, like I guess it is a kind of invisible cultural thing that then would probably make external partnerships and collaborations work better too. Ben, do you want to say anything about your point, or or just kind of expand on that question?
It's sort of what it says on the tin, really. I suppose. I mean, I was sort of reflecting on some of the, you know, we've talked in this session and we talked in previous sessions about kind of, you know, structures to enable and create collaboration, and it's almost kind of, it's that sort of permission giving piece, and it's kind of what, you know, we've talked here about how do you create that sort of culture of trust and so on, but it, you know, sometimes it's sort of front line, it's easier somehow, people just kind of get on with it because it's natural and it needs to be done. If, you know, we run lots of services where we have to be integrated into sort of local domestic abuse agencies, and we have to be, you know, sort of working very closely with CAB because, you know, people come to relate for lots of different reasons, and often would be better off being supported by other organisations. And so it kind of happens very naturally at a local level because it's kind of, it's the obvious way to meet kind of customer need. But I think when you're thinking about it from a sort of an organisational perspective and the sort of the value of strategy and so on and so forth, we kind of start to complicate it. And we have to kind of give ourselves permission, and then, you know, that sort of then feeds itself back down the sort of into the organisation, doesn't it? So, you know, staff will start to say things like, "Are we allowed to talk to such and such, you know, or so and so?" And you kind of think, "Oops, we've really got it wrong here, haven't we?" Like, if people are like starting to ask those questions. But I just, you know, it's kind of how do you take that kind of sort of much more entrepreneurial piece, perhaps sometimes that's at the front line, and capture that and support it. And I think Debbie's response in the chat box about, yes, it is about leadership and it is about culture, but it's kind of just, you know, sort of where else can we find some lessons, I guess, and some learning.
I definitely recognise that. I don't want to say anything that will get me into trouble, but, you know, I definitely recognise, like, you know, I think kind of in the NCVO of old, there was, you know, definitely this sense, you know, there are organisations that we compete and collaborate with. And usually it would be kind of just people just get on and collaborate. But there are some strong personalities, shall we say, at the tops of organisations sometimes, which meant that, you know, the overall relationship might not be so positive, but you kind of have to work around that. And I hope we're moving to a place really now where you never have to ask for permission to collaborate, and also you're probably not having to pretend you're not either. So that's really positive.
Yeah, that seems like a really kind of really obvious one, which is just like when kind of law, not legally, or like corporate kind of structures, hierarchies, you know, structures that actually stop you from having the conversation that would actually open that door and allow you to continue the work that you're doing. And yeah, as opposed to like more fluid network structures that can be focused on delivery. Well, I don't know if some of you might have heard of Bertzog, which is like a classic example of like a distributed organization in Holland that does kind of care and nursing, and it's structured in this completely decentralized way, solely through the action of kind of teams and circles of 12, and those teams can decide what they work on. There's another one called Hire in China, which is kind of 10,000 people, works on electrical applications. Whole there's basically a ecosystem of like startups. So instead of having a operations team, there's an operations startup that works within the ecosystem and kind of competes against other operations teams. And so anyway, it's interesting just to reflect on the role that the kind of rigid hierarchies or like company charity politics could also play in kind of blocking collaboration that happens much more easily in a crisis, where it's just kind of like, okay, we need to respond quickly. That kind of stuff goes out the window.
And just to loop that back around to the previous conversation, you know, a lot of that is driven by money. So either if you're trading and or if you want to be the people that get funded because you have the best reputation, you're seen as the lead on this. It's often those dynamics that I think are playing there. So that comes back on a funder point, back around to how funders behave.
I'd love to, Ab, you've just put something in the chat, and I know you've been working with Catalyst and, you know, listening to this conversation. Maybe you've got any reflections or, completely agree that it's distressing when collaboration is not encouraged.
Yeah, definitely. I think this was more of a perception from my kind of social and kind of peer group side of things as well, rather than professional work. So I'm in my mid-20s. Lots of my friends are also in their mid-20s, or lots of my friends also work sort of on the front line of really small organizations. And I think often we find that either people are very fearful to reach out and take initiative and collaborate, even if kind of they feel that spark in themselves, kind of like what Ben was talking about, because they feel like it will be met really badly by their managers. Or often these are the people who are on very insecure job contracts, or completely like volunteering, and if they're on insecure contracts, they're often paid very poorly too. I remember my first role in the charity sector was a 5-month contract that kept getting extended by 1 month, paid a living wage, and trying to, you know, fully support myself in the housing market here in Oxford where I live was very challenging. And I think that all of those things can add up to be kind of unknown power dynamics in the conversation between new partnerships, but also make people shy away from really reaching out and trying to engage in new partnerships. But also I think one of the really interesting things, seeing through a Catalyst lens of many of the charities and organisations that responded very strongly, of all different sizes and all parts of around the UK, a lot of the ones that had the strongest relationships that responded in this crisis very, very positively, even if though they'd never done anything in terms of digital or design in our world at all that they would put a name to. A lot of the ones that had very strong relationships were able to simply look sideways at what a peer was doing and be like, oh, I've never heard of this Zoom thing before, but they're using it in this way, or they've got this amazing way of safeguarding the young people that they're working with, and we can simply take that and try and play with that and see if that fits with what our members or our users are doing. And I think that that was a really positive side of collaboration that we saw too, and certainly in the immediacy when you just need to get something out there, or people feel that way, that seemed to work very well.
Super interesting. I've just seen the time, so we've got about 25 minutes to go. And we've just heard there's already kind of so much that we've uncovered, like really interesting, kind of talking at the level of funders, talking at the level of organizational culture, like resources that are available, also just this larger context of COVID. I wanted to give us a moment to do a kind of reflection moment. So I've got a question that I'm going to put in the chat, which is, what do you think is the most important thing to increase the net collaboration of the sector across organizations? This can be focused on things inside organizations, between organizations, or at the level of infrastructure and funders. So I'm just going to put that in the chat. And if you want to spend the next kind of 3 to 4 minutes like thinking about that and writing your response into the chat, and then we can just have a chance to kind of read each other's responses, and then we can finish the discussion with that and close. So I'm going to put this in the chat. There's an exercise where you write your answer into the chat after you've had a chance to think about it, and when you're ready, you just put your hand up visibly, or if your camera's off, I think you can put a hand. There's a reaction. You can put like a thumb up like this. So when you're ready, just raise your hand or put your thumb up, and then we'll all press send at the same time and take a moment to read what everyone comes up with. So I will, I'll put a timer on for 4 minutes and be back in 4. It's got 1 more minute. I think some people are waiting with their hands up and others are sending. So I guess I guess we could also just send trickle through our answers, and then we can start reading. So. Really interesting points. I like your point, Rachel, around kind of future-proofing collaboration. Yeah, which can be difficult around kind of assets and IP. So kind of at the legal level, how can you create safe containers, I guess, for collaboration? We've got Matt from Best Beginnings talking about more transparency and openness between organizations and working towards shared goals. Point about funders facilitating collaboration between organizations. Ben just mentioning different skills, reaching beyond known ecosystems, and also organizations being supported to play different roles in a collaborative project. Helen writing about organizational leadership, which values and encourages collaboration. And yeah, multiple people talking about kind of baking that into funding and how we give funding and what we kind of put in the contract of that, because that's very powerful. Obviously, you can put money as kind of another way of putting attention on different skills and kind of incentives. So it's a good reminder, I think, for funders, if any funders are watching this, to remember the responsibility in kind of the kind of cultures that we encourage. John talking about kind of open forums and ways to be able to communicate kind of cross-sector, which is really true. And I guess that I do have a fear that before COVID and lockdown, you know, you did just have like events where you could kind of just mingle, and it's harder to get that like mingling function on Zoom because it's usually like quite structured. And yeah, so how can we create spaces that are a bit more like socials, or ways to, yeah, that you can uncover those opportunities for collaboration. Yeah, wow, lots here. Lynn from Open Food Network, which is also one of our grant holders. So time for building trust, and where there's kind of embedded power dynamics that can take even longer. Trust building work being funded. Otherwise, yeah, that just amplifies kind of existing power dynamics. And Megan, thanks for that kind of alternative view of like actually, you know, a different perspective is like, thanks to this, if you have small children, then actually having more events online and on Zoom could actually open up more of that space and time. And I guess we are also saving a lot of time on not commuting and like potentially having a bit more headspace. But anyway, I think that's controversial given that, yeah, there's also a lot more stress and urgency in this time. Panelists, is there anything kind of jumping out at you from these answers? Is there anything you want to comment on? Does anybody from the audience have a question that you'd like to pose our panelists before we kind of move towards closing? Megan, go ahead.
I was just reading Lynn's point about building trust, and she's particularly kind of brought up power dynamics, and I think that is really important. And what I'd add to that is kind of power dynamics and kind of history as well. I mean, as a 100-year-old organization with, you know, a new chief exec, there are a lot of things about NCVO that we want to change, but there's also a lot of perceptions of NCVO that won't change for a long time. And so, you know, sometimes we want to do something differently, but people aren't ready to perceive us differently, perhaps.
Lynn, if you wanted to come in and say a bit more about Open Food Network, I know you guys are kind of masters of networked collaboration and using digital tools in a really interesting way. I don't know if you're there, if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, vaguely here, camera off. Yeah, I guess just kind of like a lot of experience and understanding how long that trust can take to build up, and depending on the partners that are at play, you know, it is that history, Megan, like you're saying, if people are coming in with these experiences and assumptions, yeah, like I guess that's the nature of power dynamics. Often you don't know that they exist if you're coming from the position of power. It's very hard to recognize that because you're not a person deliberately creating them, but long histories of mistrust. really make it so hard to kind of get past this and move forward into a genuine collaboration rather than that kind of quasi collaboration where everyone sits in a room but the same voices are talking and then you tick some boxes on a form, you know, like that genuine collaboration is hard.
Yeah, that's really interesting, kind of bringing in that perspective of like power, and that hadn't actually come up very much so far in the webinar, but like, yeah, those power dynamics that can make collaboration difficult, especially like larger charities or smaller charities, and likelihood of getting funding or track records. And yeah, that can definitely, I can imagine that makes things quite a lot more complicated. David, do you want to ask your question? And then we've also got John's question, we could ask them together. So go ahead.
I'm not sure there is a question. There's a couple of things. First, just to pick up on what Megan said there, I think one of the things that all of this has done is made us all a bit more prepared to be vulnerable with one another than we were before. So there's a little bit more of an openness, and we've seen that, as I've said, with organisations sharing knowledge around digital. I think in terms of funders, my question is about how do we get funders to, you know, when you fund a service, you're not just funding delivery of the service, you're funding somebody to develop knowledge around that. And then who does that knowledge belong to? If it just belongs to that organisation, the funding comes to an end after 2 years, and then it's lost. And a couple of years later, somebody funds somebody to find the same knowledge out again. And if the funders thought more about shared learning and investing in shared learning, and saying part of the criteria is you share what you learn.
That's a great point. I think that's fantastic. I think we've done a bit of that in the digital fund, but it's really just the beginning. But yeah, I guess part of what you're saying is like making open sourcing learning and open sourcing, you know, even code that, you know, when funders fund, say, Open Food Network, you know, their code is open source. So it's like, actually that's funding that work and development is for the sector. It's a public good, and kind of adding to a commons, and that feels really important. Lucy, Renee, Megan, do you have anything to weigh in? We've also got John's question, which is, how do you find projects to collaborate on?
Just coming in on David's point, I mean, I think our whole program of work is based on shared learning. Like, we publish everything that we produce, and also improving access to existing learning that's out there. But I think one of the things that we're grappling with is about how do we communicate about our process, so our internal learning of doing the sharing, because it's so new to this field. We're the only organisation in the refugee and migration field that kind of works in this way, but works with digital in this way. And we're conscious that it's important to share that, and we're just sort of grappling with how to do that in a way that's useful and meaningful for others. And I think that's exactly your point around sharing the commons, because if others are going to adopt it, they kind of need to understand what they're not doing at the moment, and the value of doing that, but also the pitfalls and things to think about if they're going to replicate as well. So yeah, it's something that we're really live to. It just very quickly on the question around how do we identify projects to collaborate, we're constantly updating our field analysis. So that's based on our relationships and constant conversations with partners in the field, which has grown hugely since COVID in particular, and the handbook and now the website. And one of the challenges for us is to be able to maintain that constant knowledge at a really local level, and there's limits to how much we can share and to be able to pick that up. But what we would then do is pull out the themes that are emerging in terms of practice themes, and then think about the resources that we have, and therefore the priority practice issues that we would focus on, and develop collaboration that way, and work out whether or not it's a capacity building offer or it's a service delivery collaboration, or a mixture of both.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Renee was saying about sharing learning and making everything open source. We're doing more and more of that at the moment, in terms of publishing more blogs and our guidance, and some of our due diligence processes and things like that. And I'd just be really interested to know more from others about where the best place is to share all the learning, because we try and put things out, and actually we're not sure if it is reaching the right people. It's quite difficult to measure sometimes, so that's kind of something that we're grappling at the moment. But also links into John's questions, because some of the things we are sharing are getting comment back on things like Twitter, and that's where some conversations are starting and relationships are coming about through that kind of activity that is happening smaller scale. So I was just trying to think, imagine if we could get this out even further and we could collaborate even more with different people, because some of our relationships have come around through that kind of sharing of our own learning. But I think some of our relationships, as I mentioned earlier, have really just been over a really long period. Like, for example, the one I spoke about earlier about the police, just having those contacts over time at a local level and then building that up, and then the collaboration that's coming about at the moment is more about being both in the kind of right space at the right time and having that opportunity to work together in a more collaborative way. So I think there's lots of different ways that relationships can start, and sometimes it's quite organic and sometimes it's more planned, but that's how we're finding it at the moment.
Cool. Well, we've got around 10 more minutes. I'm wondering if anybody else has a question they'd like to seed, or one of our other grant holders might want to, if you want to kind of weigh in on anything that we've talked about. Yeah, please go ahead. Otherwise, I also have some questions left that we can still go into. Silence. This is very unusual for a Digital Fun learning event. I mean, we have covered like extensive ground. I'm finding myself like quite just like reflecting on all of the different things that have been covered. I would just ask, maybe like as closing thoughts, what moving forward, kind of looking at the next 5 years and towards the future, where will you be putting your kind of resource or attention in terms of building resilient networks, good partnerships, and like investing in like building kind of relationships looking forward to the future, if we want to finish with a kind of future facing point?
Shall I start? Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about the kind of skills that people may need in terms of collaborating better in future, and thinking about just basic practical tools like shared understanding of how we use online tools and using the same ones across different organizations and sectors, instead of grappling with, is it Teams, is it Zoom, is it Skype, that kind of thing, and different kind of collaboration tools that are out there, that like Miro and Kahoot and whiteboards, that are quite, if you work in digital, you're quite familiar with, but outside of that, people kind of would need more skills in terms of how to use that kind of thing and establishing how they're used across different organizations. And thinking about skills for the future, we've talked about it a little bit more, but communication skills, whether that's internal or external, probably, as TCS, we're getting better at this, but I think we can always learn and improve. And there's even like in a group environment, there's different ways that people communicate, and just taking that into consideration as well. And we'd really like to kind of upskill people in things like user research and data sharing, and I think that can really enable and help collaboration when there's the research and evidence to kind of back up what you want to do and to support your main goal. So those are the kind of things that we want to kind of in the future get better at.
Great, thank you. It's really great to hear there's such specific points, and bringing back making it quite real and practical. Megan or Renee, do you want to go next?
Okay. What are we going to be focusing on? Yes, I mean, this particular point in time in kind of moving to this new organisation at NCVO. So I'm definitely going to be wanting to think much more about what it means to be an open and collaborative and inclusive organisation, kind of in line with our new values, and what that looks like, and how what we can do in kind of design and thinking about how we kind of make decisions and how we work together, and practical things like the tools that we use, and how we kind of celebrate those kind of collaborative behaviours inside and outside, and really encourage those. So I guess that'll be a big focus. And then, you know, like most organisations, obviously we've taken a massive financial hit. So more than ever, you know, we really need to think about what is our best role. I mean, our new strategic goals are still broad, so we still have to do that bit of kind of focusing where our attentions need to be and where we work with others and where we just step back. So those are going to be the kind of the big questions, and I'm just trying to learn whatever I can from the best people who design those kind of cross-organisational partnerships.
I think thanks, Megan. I think for us, the big focus is about shifting power to people with lived experience in both the design and the delivery and development of the work. So the sector is really imbalanced in terms of people with lived experience leading organisations, but also being part of those design conversations in particular, as well as delivery. So we're really focused on that. We're doing a lot of work at the moment, both within Refugee Action, but also as part of the Good Practice team's work. So that will be that's a big priority and focus for us in the years ahead. I think just again picking up on what Megan was saying around resource pressures and demand pressures, I think the more that we can all be clear with one another about our priorities and our own USPs, we're much better able to collaborate in a really clear and transparent way. Like, this is a thing that we can lead on and work with you. This is the thing that you could lead on. You know, it'd be much clearer and more agile in terms of how we can work together to respond to the needs of the system, as opposed to and how we can contribute as organisations. And then the last thing is really building in our UX design capacity internally. So our good practice teams are our experts, but they're very externally focused. We're trying to integrate that much more internally, so we're using that across all of our work and the way that we operate, particularly within our services teams. So yeah, those are sort of the three things that we'll be prioritising.
Renee, just to pick up the final point about UX and doing design internally, where do you feel that plays a really big role in increasing collaborative capacity?
So I think that we'll be able to respond faster, I think, in terms of reflecting on and even just small changes to our service design. So I think, you know, it sort of reflects the funding constraints that we have. You know, we've got restricted income for specific projects, but you can still within that use UX design to be able to tweak and refine and improve those by using that methodology, and then be able to go back and reflect that learning back to, you know, our funders. So I think that it's we're at the beginning stages of building that into the way that we work, but I think that it will really I think it'll create a much more user-centered, not that we don't, but I think it'll be much more user-centered and dynamic way of improving the impact of the services that we deliver.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you for bringing that in. Just like also kind of agile culture. And Megan, you also kind of touched on this of like that can actually also open up more of a kind of collaborative muscle or kind of interoperability, I guess, between different organizations. It's interesting to see, like, but over the course of the conversation, we've been talking more and more about open source and applying these kind of principles from the tech world, which is where there are often these kind of mass collaborations, especially in the open source world, where code is just like picked up by, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of different people who have never met before. But because the principles and the ways of collaborating are very clear, and, you know, the world of tech and code doesn't actually involve like relationships and politics as much as the kind of human world, it can be a lot easier, although obviously also sometimes has problems. But yeah, really, really interesting. Massive thank you to the three of you, Lucy, Renee, Megan. Thank you for joining us and sharing so openly about your experiences and challenges and just sharing that learning. I mean, it's kind of collaboration in action when we come together like this and share, and it's just always really good as well to have people from like familiar faces from both within the digital fund ecosystem of support and grant holders, but then also kind of the outer layers of like Catalyst, and I can see David from Social Tech, and others, and also to Chris and Melissa, who are also here from the lottery. So yeah, I think we just need at least more of these kind of spaces where different people from across the sector can kind of come together and make sense of things. And yeah, thank you so much for joining, and look forward to seeing you next month for another session. Continue to have a good evening, and see you soon.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Thanks, Phoebe. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.